Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, I am going solo today with you as my guest. That's right. These are one of those shows where I have no guest in the show except for you who want to call in and talk about whatever we're talking about. Today, I want to be covering the news here in Israel that we will not be going now to new elections like many people feared. The clock was running down. The budget had to be voted on. If it wasn't going to be voted on by let's say Monday night, then Israel would be going to new elections. At the last hours of the evening yesterday, they voted to postpone the vote. That's how things work in politics. They voted to postpone the vote for the budget to another 120 days. And that means that we will not be going to elections now in November. However, that doesn't mean that we won't be going to new elections after 120 days, because if after 120 days, when the budget again has to be voted upon, because a government can't run without a budget, then if they still can't get an agreement going, then we'll go to new elections, okay? So it's crazy what's going on. The world it's crazy what's going on in the world as well. And so we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the United Arab Emirates and their desire for peace with Israel. It's not such a rainbow and unicorn looking world. They have their demands, they have their red lines, and we'll see if this really materializes. And also how the left operates. This is very important to understand because the left is getting very, very powerful, even though it is the minority, the minority in the United States that are this extreme Marxist left, the big minority, like maybe 5% tops in all of Israel, but they're making a lot of noise. It's kind of like the last gasps of a dying man, but they are making lots of noise. We're going to be talking about how they operate and what to look for. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Feel free to call in.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, so the fear of going to new elections in November has passed here in Israel, but only for the next 120 days. Israel, the government here, which is made up of the right and center left, which is the blue and white under Benny Gantz and the Likud under Prime Minister Netanyahu, where they would have a rotational government. Netanyahu is going to be the prime minister for the first period, and after he finishes, he's going to hand over the mantle to Benny Gantz to be the prime minister. Now, I understand why the blue and white does not want to go to new elections, because I believe that they know that if they do, they're not going to make it into the government again with the amount of seats that they received last time. Because there's a lot of people in Israel who, though they even may appreciate Benjamin Netanyahu, they're kind of sick of him, you know? He's been the prime minister for over a decade, And we've got Corona. We've got all sorts of things happening. Well, that's happening now. But beforehand, whenever you have ills, you want to see a change of government. And they voted in Benny Gantz. His whole structure, his whole platform was anyone but Bibi. We have to get Bibi out. And then they got the votes, but he could not make a government. He did not have enough people to make a government. So the right wing is, even though they got a lot of votes, the right wing as a whole got more votes. And you have to have, out of the 120 Knesset seats that we have, you have to have at least 61 of those seats going in with you together in a coalition to make a government. None of them were really able to make a government on their own, even though the right did have more people. So they agreed to sit together, which, by the way, I hate to say it, was the right thing to do, since we're in a terrible situation of having a pandemic, a terrible plague that has taken the lives of so many people and is affecting so many thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So they did the right thing, but in a sense, Benny Gantz, who led the Blue and White Party, sold out because he got into bed with someone that he said, we're going to oust. And anyone but this guy, and then he goes to bed with him. In politics, I'm talking about politics. And I don't think he's going to garner many votes. And in fact, if you look at the polls here in Israel, they also predict that he will not be getting many votes this round if we go to new elections. And I know that he will be prime minister if he sticks it out. And if Bibi sticks it out, he'll have his chance. If they go to new elections, he'll never be the prime minister of Israel. Now, the Blue and White Party did break up when Benny Gantz agreed to sit with Netanyahu in a government. We call it the Corona government because basically it was set up to deal with the crises that were going on with Israel. And Netanyahu wanted to keep power. It's very important that Netanyahu is in power now because of the terrible things facing Israel. He is better with the economy than anybody else that I can see in the Knesset. And we need him because it is the coronavirus now is affecting us terribly, as it is every other country in the world. We also have Iran, the Iranian threat. And I believe, though I have my misgivings and mistrust and anger even at some of the things that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has done, I still think that from what we have here available of people in politics, that he's the best we've got. And I believe that there's nobody better to deal with Iran than Bibi at this time. I don't see anyone else waiting in the wings to come up, even if they don't have power. I don't see anybody else that's able to do what Bibi can do. Bibi is a mastermind when it comes to politics. I would even say he's a genius. He is always pulling a rabbit out of his hat. And he's a survivor. And he has both the ear of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Donald Trump, President Donald Trump in the United States. He has a good relationship with both of these superpowers. No one else in Israeli politics has their ear, has this relationship, this good working and mutual respectful relationship with these superpowers than Bibi. And again, I want to reiterate, I have a lot of problems with Bibi. He's done a lot of things that I do not like. And one of them, the most recent went back on his promise to deliver sovereignty in parts of Judea and Samaria. Now, I believe we should put sovereignty in the entire area of Judea and Samaria. We should dismantle and defund, not the police, the Palestinian Authority. It is an evil, corrupt entity. I'll repeat that. The Palestinian Authority is an evil and corrupt entity. And all of these leftists in the United States who are screaming to defund the police because they are violent, because they are corrupt, that's what they're claiming and saying. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's what they're saying, should naturally be wanting to defund the Palestinian Authority because they are corrupt and they need to be defunded and they are hurting innocent people. You want to talk about violence against innocent people? Their own journalists, their own bloggers are arrested, beaten, held in captivity by their police. Why then are they for this apartheid government? Because if you want to talk about apartheid, let's talk about the Palestinian Authority, where no Jew is allowed to live, where no Jew is allowed to buy land or buy property. And if an Arab sells their apartment or their property to a Jew, they are also either taken in and beaten up or they're killed. That's what the Palestinian Authority is. It is a corrupt place where nations around the world have been feeding it hundreds of millions of dollars, and the people don't see it. They're still burning their garbage in the street because they don't even have decent garbage disposal there. Where is all that money going? It's going into pad the bank accounts of their corrupt leaders. Can you imagine if the police chiefs of America were taking the money that were supposed to be going to the police and to the communities, and they were padding their own bank accounts with it? Well, that's what's happening in the Palestinian Authority. They should be defunded and dismantled, and Israel should apply sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria. And let me add to this that if we did that, the lives of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria would be so much better. A, they would be more prosperous because there would be more freedom. They would have more rights. Do you know that Arabs that live in Israel enjoy more rights than in any other Arab country, any other Muslim country in the world? That's right. The Arabs that live in Israel enjoy more freedoms and more rights. Women don't have to go with a veil. Women don't have to be accompanied by a man in order to go out someplace. Women have equal opportunity. And you will see in Israel Arabs who serve in the Supreme Court here, Arabs who serve in the Knesset here, Arabs who are doctors and lawyers and physical therapists and pharmacists and professionals all over. And women also. In fact, my mother went to a female Arab dentist. You're not going to see these things in the Arab Islamic worlds as you do in Israel. So we would be doing the Arabs a favor if we applied sovereignty, dismantled the Palestinian Authority and applied sovereignty. But Bibi didn't do it. Bibi apparently believes that it's more important to make a peace treaty with the UAE and to postpone. That's what they're saying in the press. Don't worry. Bibi didn't say he's canceling applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. All it means is that he's postponing it. He's not going to do it now. And I have to tell you, I do not have all the facts in my hands that Bibi does. And maybe on a political level, I'm not talking about a religious, spiritual level, on a political level, he may be right. I don't know. I still don't agree with it. But those are his, what we call in Hebrew, his shikulim. Those are the things that he has weighed, and he has come to the decision that it's better to go on the scale of making a peace treaty with the UAE. Now, saying that, you know what? I don't have time. The music's coming on now, and we have to go to a break. But when we get back, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means, this peace overtures with the UAE that they're making towards Israel. You know what? Even if one country benefits more than the other, that still doesn't mean it's bad. However, I want to take a deeper look into that, and feel free to call in. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel.
Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
All right, you're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And we're talking about some of the news headlines that are going on here in Israel and around the world. And I want to talk now about the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the map of the Middle East. I know that Americans, especially because you're so isolated and feel so secure, and that's a blessing, by the way, that you don't really pay attention to too many other nations because you don't feel their effect of dealings with them. You know, if you go to Europe, you're going to find people who speak several languages because Italy is bordering France, and France is bordering Spain, and Spain is bordering, this country, and you've got Germany, and you've got so many different countries there that are very, very close border-wise, and they depend on each other's economy a lot more, especially with the European Union that they've developed there. And so they're more aware of things. But Americans, a lot of them don't know the difference, I'm sad to say, between Sweden and Switzerland. And if you ask them where these places were, I don't even know if they would be able to tell you. So let me explain to you just a little bit about the map of the Middle East, because the Middle East is a vast expanse. And it connects three different continents. You've got it connecting here in Israel. It is the hub of to the north, to the northwest. You've got already Europe, and you've got go straight up. You've got Lebanon, Syria, and you've got Turkey, and Turkey that then leads to the western continent of Europe. And down below Israel, you connect with the Sinai, but that is already part of Egypt today, lawfully, de jure. And that is the the African continent. And then to the east of Israel, you've got the wide Arab expanse of Arab Islamic countries, which then goes into Iran, which then goes deeper into Asia. So you've got Europe, Asia, and Africa. And there is a lot of what happens in one place affects another place. Now, Israel, since its inception, since its liberation and its independence in 1948 to form the modern state of Israel, we have had our hands out for peace with our neighbors here for decades and decades and decades. And unfortunately, the Arabs decided that they don't want to have anything to do with Israel. They don't accept us. They don't want to negotiate with us. They don't want to have peace with us. And there was a breakthrough in 1970, was it 76, 78? I'm forgetting now my history. But where Israel had peace with Egypt. Now, that was at a huge cost to Israel. I want you to understand that Israel, after 1967, after Israel was going to be attacked by all of these Arab nations, and we opened up the first strike to protect ourselves in a defensive war, we were able to liberate many, many parts of Israel. That's where we got what some people call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Before that, it was in the hands of Jordan, a fake state. Jordan was a state that was just, borders were drawn, and the British and the French after World War I, when they won this area from the Turkish or Ottoman Turks, the Ottoman Empire that was here occupying the lands for hundreds of years, the British and the French came in after World War I, and they divvied up the whole Middle East. They drew lines, and they said France is going to take care. That's why they speak French in Lebanon. Did you know that one of the main languages that they speak in Lebanon is French? It's because the French were occupying that area. And in Israel, we know English so well because the British had the mandate here, the Palestine Mandate, and they were supposed to make this area of Palestine, which the Arabs cannot pronounce. They say Palestine because there is no P in the Arabic language. We know that Palestine was never an Arab entity. That Palestine meant, if someone was a Palestinian, it meant they were a Jew. The Arabs were Arabs, and if you called an Arab back in those days a Palestinian, they would take umbrage to it because it means you called them a Jew. And Jews all over America and all over Europe had these little pushkas, what we say, these little charity boxes that said Palestine on it because Palestine was the Jews. And we would put money in there in order to buy and purchase land from a lot of these Turkish landlords and some Arabs there that had land. And the Jews had land too, but we wanted to expand it, and we wanted to do it in a friendly, cooperative way. And so we would purchase it from them. We would make them rich. They didn't want it anyway. A lot of the land here in Israel was swampy. There was malaria here. Israel in those days certainly didn't look like it does today. There are less than 600,000 Jews in all of the land of Israel in those days here, and even less Arabs. So the Jewish people were buying different parts and making other people rich, and we were buying this land. Today, a lot of this land that we bought is in the hands again of the Arabs. But in 1967, Israel was able to liberate a lot of these lands. And we got Judea and Samaria, and we got the Golan Heights. And the Golan Heights is in the north of Israel on the Syrian border there. And it was extremely important, of strategic military importance that we had that, because in those heights, they were looking down over the Jordan Valley. They were looking down over the Sea of Galilee. And they were constantly attacking us from Jordan, from Syria. And they were on top, and they were looking down, and it was very easy for them to shoot down at us, at our communities. And when we were able to get up there in the heights, we were able to push the Syrians back. And we have peace in the Galilee now because we're there, and not the terrorists, and not the Syrians who hated us and who were vicious. I don't know if you know the stories of what they used to do to our soldiers when there was a war, and they would kill some of our soldiers, and they were able to get close to their bodies. They would take their sexual organ and they would cut it off. They would castrate them and stick it in their mouths. The body, They would take the body of the Israeli soldier, they would castrate him and stick it in the mouth of the body of the Israeli soldier. That's how we found them. They were vicious. They're vicious to their own people. So much more they were vicious to the Jews who they hate even more. And Israel finally makes peace with Egypt at a cost. We had the entire Sinai. In the Sinai, it was, number one, it was probably 2 to 3 times the size of Israel today. So we lost humongous amounts of territory that we were able to use to practice our air flights. We had cat and mouse. This is what the Air Force would do. We would have our own 2 planes, pretend they were in battle, and instead of shooting at each other, they would take a picture. If in the picture they got a picture of the plane, it was like a hit. And we had the Sinai to practice over. When we gave the Sinai away to Egypt in hopes for a warm peace, we lost 2 to 3 times the size of Israel. We lost the airspace where we were able to practice, and so we had to start practicing over the Mediterranean Sea instead. And again, I don't know how many people of you know this, but Menachem Begin, a great prime minister of Israel, his grandson was a pilot in the Israeli Air Force. And tragically, in one of these practice runs over the Mediterranean Sea, his grandson got vertigo. It's very difficult sometimes, at least in those days, to be able to tell the difference between the sea and the sky. They're both blue, and you're going at very, very fast speeds. And you can get vertigo. It's possible to get it. And he crashed. He crashed his plane, and he was killed, tragically. And ironically, it was Menachem Begin who signed the Camp David Accords and gave this Sinai to the Arabs. Not only did we have the size of Israel, the land taken off of our country, but we found uranium there. Uranium which helped in the defense of Israel. And we again had the military bases there to protect Israel, because the further we could keep hostile Arab forces away from places like the south of Israel and Tel Aviv, the safer we were. When Egypt was already in the Sinai and they had their troops there, they could march into Tel Aviv. They could be into Tel Aviv in a couple of hours. When they had to go through the Sinai desert, when we had it, we would have been able to pick them off much, much easier. They wouldn't have been able to get near Tel Aviv. But Israel, in its belief for peace and its desire for peace, gave away the entire Sinai, gave away our uranium deposits, gave away our military edge. And we do have peace with Egypt, but it's a cold peace, sadly. We don't see tourism here. We don't see businesses here and investment like you would see between two countries that have peace between each other. And with Jordan, the same thing. We gave up parts of the Jordan Valley. We're renting it from them because we have farms there, etc. It's strategic for us as well. But again, it's a very cold peace, an even colder peace with Jordan. And with the UAE, I'm hoping that with what we've given up of postponing sovereignty and they not opening up their embassy in Israel, in Jerusalem, only in Tel Aviv, these are things that are a loss to Israel, this recognition. But let's hope for the best. When we get back, we'll take your calls if you want to call in.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on The Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, you're listening to the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And just to follow up on what I was talking about before in the last segment, and then we're going to go talk about the left and what's happening in the world today because of them. I want to say that you have to be careful. There's a saying in Hebrew, kabdehu v'chashtehu, respect him but suspect him, meaning that we want peace, but we have to be very careful because these people have been our enemies. They didn't want to talk to us, let alone have peace with us. And all of a sudden they want peace now. And the reason that they do is because they're afraid of their own existence, because they've got Iran. I wanted to explain the map of the Middle East to you because Iran is right near these Gulf Arab countries like Bahrain, like the United Arab Emirates, etc., that's putting its hand out for peace with Israel now. And you have to understand that if the threat of their existence were to go away and they don't need peace with Israel because they're very rich Gulf countries, would they still be trustworthy? Would they still be honest peace partners? Because just because they decide, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, if their enemy goes away, then their so-called friend is their enemy again. Let's remember, they're Muslims, and they are not too friendly with other countries that are not Muslim, and in fact, not even friendly with other Muslim countries that are not their type of Muslim countries. And it's sad because Israel does want peace with everyone. So we're hoping for the best. We want to be optimistic. They say that Sudan in Africa may also fall in line and want to make peace with Israel. Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, they're talking about. And I'll tell you, if indeed these countries truly want peace and truly want to just put down the axe and say, you know what, it's a wonderful thing, Israel. We see in the last decades what it has done, how it has prospered, how it has made the region better. We see how their people live with the freedoms that they have and the prosperity. They've turned a desert into green, and see their progress there and all of the wonderful things that Israel stands for, that we want to be like that too. This would be a wonderful thing. And as I've said, my mother always used to tell me, it's so sad that we don't have peace with the Arabs because with their money that they have from their oil, etc., and our brains, if we work together, we could do spectacular things for the world. Spectacular things. And look how Israel's turned the desert into green. Go look at a satellite picture of the region here, and you're going to see beige, 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 the sands of Arabia. And then you see this green spot, and that is Israel. Because 80 years ago, 70 years ago, it would have been the same thing, beige, beige, beige here in the land of Israel as well. Because for 2,000 years, this land has sat fallow. It has grown hardly anything, very difficult to eke out a living here. People are very poor, all the Jews who lived in Israel, or the land of Israel, I should say, all these centuries. Yep, it wasn't just Arabs here, there were Jews here. They lived very, very poorly, and Jews were giving tzedakah. They were giving charity from America. Also in those pushkas and those little charity boxes, it was going to help the Jews of Palestine, the Palestinians, the Jews. When I say Palestinians, I mean the Jews. But look at us today. Look what we've done. It's amazing. It's a miracle. It's with God's blessing. And I believe that the next superpower, my friends, is going to be Israel. The future is going to be in Israel. I want you to repeat that in your mind, because all of you who are vacillating, should I leave America with all that's going on now? What if Biden wins? It's not going to be good for the Jews. Because the left is never good for the Jews. We saw what happened with the left when they took over in Russia. I mean, it wasn't good for Jews before, under the Tsar, but it was even worse for Jews under the communist leftists over there. So if you're vacillating, remember this. The next superpower and the future is going to be here in Israel. And this is where you should be. It's all going to be happening here. It's going to be a rocking and a rolling right here in Israel. This is where the future is. This is where the technology is. This is where the discoveries and the inventions and all of everything is taking off from Zion. It's amazing. Now let's talk about the left and how they're going to roll things backwards. You know, the left is promising people so many things. We're going to give you financial equality. We're going to do redistribution. We're going to defund, and we're going to build back better. That's their line, the Democrats today, who have turned a sharp left. The Democrats have turned a sharp left. Build back better. But what comes before build back better? Destruction. In order to build back, you have to have destruction. And that's what we're seeing happening in these major cities today, in New York, in San Francisco, with the sanctuary cities, seeing what's going on there with the homelessness and the people going to the bathroom in the sidewalks. They have apps today to tell you where not to walk because there might be human excrement there. I mean, what has happened to America the beautiful? Such a great country. It saddens me to have to talk like this. And you go to Seattle and you go to Portland. Portland's still on fire. Every night they're burning things down. And you see what's going on in all these different cities. And if the left wins, I believe it's going to get worse like that. Because to build back better, you have to destroy first. I get shivers when I hear Biden say, build back better. First of all, it's not better. It's never better when you're tying someone's hands and you're taking away their freedoms, because the only way to make their financial equality, to help redistribute, is to take money from the people who have it, who have worked for it. Because America was that utopia in a sense where if you worked hard, you were very likely to make a fortune. Where any little boy or girl that was born in the United States was able to grow up and be president. There wasn't a caste system where you were born in this class and therefore you will never rise. No, there was freedom. You know, if your parents prevented you from growing up and leaving the house and making it on your own and kept you at home and say, stay home. We'll give you food. We'll give you a roof over your head. You won't have to worry about anything. Sounds good. But then you have to live under the house rules. If they tell you that you have to live in this bedroom here, then you have to live in that bedroom, even though you have to share the room with somebody you don't want to share it with. And you have to eat the food that they give you in the kitchen that the mother cooks. And you have to, if they send you out to get a job, you're going to have to give your money to the household. And yes, you've got a roof over your head and you've got food on the table and they're taking care of you, but you've lost your freedom. And all of these promises that the left is giving people today, that we're going to, look at these rich people, how they're living. And by the way, they always point to the Jews too. It's sooner or later it's going to be the Jews. So you're already seeing it now with the anti-Semitism growing up. But we'll bypass that for now. How are they going to get this money to give to you and redistribute? They're going to raise taxes. And when they raise taxes, people don't go out and spend money anymore. And the economy hurts, and then you don't have a strong America. I mean, all of these things are like domino effects. You can't just get money from nothing. And if they start printing money, then you're going to have inflation. And they're already seeing that. The left likes to control you. They promise you and they hang the carrot in front of your face saying, here's the carrot, but you give up your freedom for that. And a very good example of how the left works, but in a good way, was the Israeli kibbutz. The Israeli kibbutz was very, very left. It was the idea of we're going to have a utopia where we're all going to work together. Everything is going to be distributed equally between us, whether you're working on the farm or whether you're working in the children's house taking care of the children. By the way, in the early days of the kibbutz, your children did not live with you, because your children were part of the community. They were part of the communal So they belong to you, but you didn't really raise them. You could see them. Afterwards, they would come after your day of work. You would hang out with them for a couple of hours in the evening, but then they would go back to the children's house and go to sleep, and there'd be somebody else taking care of them, because that's what communism is. And so you had very little freedom on a kibbutz. But the difference of a kibbutz is that it wasn't communist Russia, the Soviet Union, because in a kibbutz you were free to leave. They didn't make you stay there. It was for people who said, you know what, I like this lifestyle. I like being a farmer. I can't afford my own land. I can't afford my own tractor. I can't afford my own seed. I like living in a community where we're together. And in the end, the kibbutzim got rid of the children's houses, and children started living at home with their parents. And they started getting better financially because they went out only from farming. They started opening up companies and production, and started making furniture, all sorts of things. Many different kibbutzim make many different things. But the key here was they were free to leave. And in a leftist society, you're not so free anymore. You've given up your rights. So beware, beware, beware. And remember that the future is here in Israel. And if you're not Jewish and you're staying in America, stay away from the left and their promises. We've seen, just look in other countries, Cambodia, China, Russia, what it was like, Venezuela, to live under the socialist communistic regimes. You had no freedoms, and they were poor, and they lived poor. Wake up. You want to be woke? Wake up and study history. You've been listening to the Tamar Yonah Show.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.